Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really strange, slightly uncomfortable truth that almost nobody talks about. You see, the most powerful people in any field, they're rarely the ones who just sat through the most formal education. No, they're the ones who, at some pivotal moment, took absolute complete responsibility for their own learning. They made this massive shift from being passive consumers of content to becoming formidable independent thinkers. They basically went deeper into a subject than any school would ever ask them to go.
And that brings us to a fascinating concept, becoming dangerously self-educated. Now, to be clear, we don't mean dangerous in a harmful or destructive sense. Not at all. Rather, it means developing a depth of understanding that makes someone genuinely formidable in their field. It's about building a mind that sees things others completely miss, a mind that effortlessly connects ideas across completely different domains, and works complex problems through to conclusions that surprise even the top experts.
And this brilliantly illustrates the massive difference between these two paths. On one side, you have the credentialed thinker. This is often someone with a pretty shallow understanding who's entirely reliant on formal systems to just tell them what to think. But on the other side, we have the dangerously self-educated mind. And the path to getting there actually has very little to do with how many books you can speed read or how many online courses you binge. Instead, it relies heavily on principles derived from the older Japanese tradition, particularly the long history of master and apprentice learning. It's a tradition that focuses on what actually produces real, lasting knowledge in a human mind.
So, to get there, we are going to methodically unpack a four-part foundational plan today. We'll cover grasping concepts over speed, mastery in a single domain, writing as active thinking, bringing knowledge into practice, and finally, what makes up the dangerously educated mind.
Okay, let's dive into this first one. Section 1, Grasping Concepts over Speed. Let's talk about our modern obsession with speed. Most people approach self-education by trying to consume as much material as humanly possible. They treat reading as if just passing words through your eyes is the exact same thing as learning. But the Japanese tradition of deep study offers this amazing concept of rakai. Rakai means to grasp something so thoroughly that it has literally become a part of you. And to do this, you have to dramatically slow down. Instead of racing to finish a chapter, you might spend an entire afternoon on just 3 pages. Because 3 pages of deep, deliberate engagement produces infinitely more real knowledge than 300 pages of ordinary surface-level reading.
Achieving this requires a highly actionable 3-step process. First, you break the ideas into smaller and smaller parts. Second, you close your eyes and visualize the concept in your imagination until you can see it clearly without looking at the book. And third, you imagine explaining it to someone who knows absolutely nothing about the subject. Seriously, if you cannot explain it simply, you haven't genuinely absorbed it yet. The dangerously self-educated person actually reads less than most people, but understands far more.
Section 2, Mastery in a Single Domain. So eager learners often fall into a massive trap right at the start. They try to study 20 different things at once just to become well-rounded, right? They're doing philosophy in the morning, history in the afternoon, and economics at night. But the Japanese tradition of mastery teaches the exact opposite through an old principle called ichik nihu. This translates to entering deeply into one art. It suggests that the true path to becoming genuinely formidable doesn't run through scattered, shallow exposure to a bunch of topics. It runs through extreme, focused depth in a single chosen domain. The reasoning here is highly psychological, and honestly, it's brilliant. When you go incredibly deep into one subject, you eventually hit a level where you start to see the underlying structures of knowledge itself. You actually learn how to learn, and those insights transfer to literally every other domain you encounter later in life. The person dabbling in 20 things, well, they only learn how to dabble and probably just end up being kind of annoying at dinner parties. You have to choose an area you can spend years inside, and then protect your focus on it with a quiet stubbornness.
Moving on to Section 3, Writing as Active Thinking. Now, what's really interesting about this comparison is how it fundamentally shifts how we process what we consume. We're adapting this directly from the journals of Japanese scholars and craftsmen. And there is a crucial distinction to make here. Taking notes is just making a passive record of what you have read, but keeping a thinking document, that is entirely different. It's a private written space where you actively develop your understanding through writing. When you force vague, unspoken ideas from your head into clear written sentences, it immediately exposes the contradictions and the gaps in your understanding. You aren't writing for an audience. The writing itself is the engine of your growing intellect. The source material shares a really beautiful anecdote about the creator's grandfather, Dike. He kept exactly this kind of thinking document for over 40 years. It basically became a living conversation with himself across decades, where he'd return to old ideas, revise them, and notice patterns over time. The depth of his thinking near the end of his life was absolutely unmatched, and it was something that simply could not have been built any other way than through decades of active, written thought.
Which brings us to Section 4, bringing knowledge into practice.
Pay close attention here, because this is the exact point where the vast majority of self-education projects just quietly fail. People accumulate a massive amount of theoretical knowledge, but it remains essentially decorative. It's like furniture in a room no one ever uses. They know all the right references, they can follow complex conversations, but the knowledge never actually impacts their daily lives. It is entirely trapped inside their heads. The master tradition insists that this just isn't enough. We have to look at the concept of Gen. Gen refers to bringing knowledge into lived practice. It is treated as the precise moment when learning actually becomes real. Your understanding must move from your mind down into your hands and out into your daily judgment.
Let's move to and see how this builds into your actual routine. Every single significant idea you encounter must be tested against reality immediately. So, if you study philosophy, apply it to your daily decisions today. If it's economics, go make predictions about real markets and track if you're actually right. If it's writing, write things that real people will actually read. Knowledge that gets applied takes root, but knowledge that stays purely theoretical will eventually just fade away.
And finally, Section 5, the dangerously educated mind.
So, what does this all mean when we put it together? When you synthesize these 4 pillars, a complete, unbreakable framework emerges. You read less but understand vastly more through Rakankai. You concentrate your learning into a single domain to see the underlying structures through Ichigo Nihyu. You write privately to clarify your thinking, and you apply your knowledge instantly to reality through Gen. Now, I'll be honest, this path is not fast. It literally cannot be hacked or shortened. It requires years of deliberate, slow work without anyone watching or handing you any external validation. But the ultimate result of walking this path is something traditional education really struggles to produce. You develop a mind shaped by its own deep thinking, rather than a mind merely filled with the contents of other people's ideas. This kind of person isn't easily manipulated because they test everything against careful thought and lived experience. They possess a quiet confidence because they know exactly what they understand and they know exactly where the edges of their understanding lie. They achieve a genuine mastery that the world eventually has absolutely no choice but to take seriously.
Which leaves us with this final, vital question to ask ourselves today. Look at your own learning habits right now. Is your knowledge entirely trapped in your head, just serving as decorative furniture? Or is it being actively lived, tested, and applied in your actual life? Take good care of your mind, you guys. It's the only one you'll ever have. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.